Does Kia have the best electric car lineup of any manufacturer? Well, it's got a pretty strong case. Typically, when Kia launches a new electric car, it either becomes the best car in its class, or it's not far off the top. The last new Kia we drove, the EV3, was a brilliant example of what's made so many of its electric cars so good. The EV3 is practical, it's comfortable, it's got a good range, and it represents fantastic value for money compared to its rivals. And so now, given Kia's track record, whenever the Korean manufacturer launches a new EV, expectations are sky high. Today, we're in Barcelona to see a new electric Kia. It's the Kia EV4, and it's aiming to take on the Tesla Model 3. Or is it? So this is the EV4, and it is based very closely on the EV3. The two cars share the same platform, and as we'll explain later, they have the same batteries and electric motors as well. But the EV4 is a slightly bigger car. It's longer, it's a little bit wider. It's not quite as tall as the EV3 though. And so while the EV3 is a small electric SUV, this is not technically an SUV. Now, in terms of styling, down at the front here, you can see it's got a very familiar electric Kia look to things with these vertical headlights as well. And the alloys will be 17 inches on the entry-level model, but these 19 inches will be available on higher trim levels. And it's likely we'll have 5 different paint colours to choose from. But UK specification is still being finalised. Anyway, while this is quite similar to the EV3, both in terms of the batteries that it offers and in terms of elements of the styling, there is one thing that makes this very different. The EV3 is a small electric SUV. The EV4 you can have either as a hatchback or as a saloon, which makes it the only electric car in Kia's lineup to be available in 2 different body styles. You can see here we have the hatchback, and this is likely to be seen as a rival to things like the VW ID3, the Cupra Born, and the Citroën EC4. But this is slightly bigger than those cars. So is it more practical? Let's take a look at the boot here. And in terms of overall capacity, this offers 435 litres, which is comfortably bigger than what you find in the boots of the ID3, the Born and the EC4. And it's not just the overall capacity that seems pretty good in this EV4. You've got things like these handy side compartments at the front of the boot, and you've also got a height adjustable boot floor, which you can see in this highest position here means you've got virtually no loading lip at the front, and underneath you've got a very helpful underfloor storage section, which is big enough for the charging cables. And if you want more room than this, you can lower the boot floor, you can fold down the rear seats, which split fold 60/40 as well. And overall, compared to those rivals, this seems like a pretty practical choice. Now this is the Saloon, and obviously, as you can see, it does look very different at the back here. And overall, this car is 30 centimetres longer than the hatchback version of the EV4. And as a result, it will be up against a different set of rivals as well. So this will be seen as an alternative to things like the Polestar 2 and the Tesla Model 3. Now, boot space-wise, this is actually pretty significantly bigger than the hatchback, but that's not the full story, because while it does ultimately offer more overall storage capacity because it's longer than the hatchback, you can see that this saloon opening obviously isn't as practical as a hatchback. And that's the case whichever saloon you look at, of course, not just the EV4. So you've got these things that eat into some of the space, you've got a fairly narrow opening, so clearly loading big bulky items into the back is going to be easier in a hatchback, as you'd expect. But it is good that you have a decent amount of space inside. You can also fold down the rear seats using these buttons here. And overall, the space on offer is more than what you find in the back of a Polestar 2, but it is still not even close to the extremely practical Tesla Model 3. If you go for the Saloon, you also won't have a rear wiper back here, and both versions of the EV4 won't get a front boot, which is a shame and makes it the only EV in Kia's lineup not to get that feature. Now, the rear seats The EV4 has the same wheelbase as the EV3, so that means the distance between the front and rear wheels is the same in both of those cars. So for legroom, this is pretty much identical to the very generously practical EV3, which is great because you can see there's tons of legroom in the back here, plenty of space to stretch out in. And with this seat as low down as it will go in front of you, you've still got a little bit of room to squeeze your feet as well. Headroom isn't quite as generous as the EV3 because, as we mentioned, this isn't as tall as that car. So you'd still have to be 6 foot or over to feel cramped in the rear seats, but it's not amazingly generous when it comes to headroom in the way that lots of SUVs can be. But still, it does feel spacious back here thanks to decent sized windows that let in a good amount of light. You've got this extra window at the back here as well. There's a flat floor. There's also a pretty flat bench. So it means if you're sat in this middle seat, then you don't feel raised up massively compared to the outer two rear seats as you can get on some cars, but you do still have quite a hard seat back there pressing into your back. So overall, compared to an ID3 Cupra Born, certainly when it comes to legroom, this is fantastic in the back here. Headroom, still very good, if not absolutely outstanding in that area. And when we compare this to the Saloon, that version of the EV4 has a little less headroom in the back, so you do feel more cramped than you do in the hatchback. Up front, once again, this is very familiar electric Kia territory here with an interior that very closely resembles what you find in the EV3, but that's no bad thing because the materials look and feel very nice. It's not been 100% confirmed what different colour schemes we're going to get in the UK here, but this has quite a pleasant two-tone finish. And the materials feel good, it's all very well put together, and when you think that this is going to be compared to perhaps an ID3, a Cupra Born, this interior compares very well against those rivals. And even the Saloon version of the EV4 that might be up against a Model 3, a Polestar 2, this is still pretty good compared to those more expensive rivals as well. It's not a perfect interior in here though. You've still got this 3-screen layout that you find in other electric Kias, and that gives you a very good fully digital driver display and a very good and responsive touchscreen infotainment system. But it also gives you this almost useless touchscreen climate control system here. And the reason it's so bad is because it's very easily blocked completely by the steering wheel. So it's very difficult to see. You've got to look around the wheel if you ever want to use it, and you've got to poke and prod at something that you can't really see. But it's not the end of the world because, as with other Kias, thankfully, you've still got physical rocker switches down here to easily adjust the temperature and the fan speed while you're driving. And you've also got some shortcut buttons for the infotainment system higher up on the dashboard here as well. So overall, certainly when you think about the rivals that this is going to be up against, this interior seems very impressive indeed. Now, what about the battery options? Well, as we've said, the EV4 will have the same lineup as the EV3. So that means there will be 2 batteries to choose from. There'll be an entry-level battery with a usable capacity of 55 kilowatt hours, and there'll be a bigger battery in the long-range versions of this car, up to 78 kilowatt hours. And when it comes to official ranges, the Saloon will be able to travel for longer distances between charges than the hatchback because it's got a slightly more aerodynamic design. So when it comes to official figures, the 55 kilowatt hour version of the hatchback will offer an official range of up to 255 miles, and that becomes 267 miles if you go for the Saloon. If you go for a long-range version, then in the hatchback, the range jumps up to 367 miles, and in the Saloon, it becomes 391 miles. Now, all of these official ranges are very usable and impressive compared to the rivals that this is going to be up against. But even though 391 is very far and sounds very impressive, it's not quite as far as the long-range versions of the Polestar 2 and of the Model 3. When it comes to charging up, the EV4 isn't particularly amazing. Whichever battery you go for, it's going to take around about 30 minutes to go from 10 to 80% in ideal conditions, which is the same as what you'll get in the EV3. And it is a bit of a shame that the mega fast charging speeds that the EV6 is capable of haven't quite filtered down to lower models in Kia's lineup. Equally, it is understandable because this is going to be a much cheaper car than the EV6. Whichever battery you go for, you will get a 201 brake horsepower electric motor driving the front wheels of the EV4. And that will give you a 0 to 62 mile an hour time of 7.4 seconds with the lighter, smaller battery and 7.7 seconds with the heavier, bigger battery. And those performance specs are exactly the same whether you go for a hatchback or the Saloon. A range-topping, performance-focused EV4 GT is expected to join the lineup soon after the launch of the EV4. And that will have 2 electric motors, one driving the front wheels, one driving the rear wheels, making it 4-wheel drive. And it's also expected to have around 300 brake horsepower and a 0 to 62 mile an hour time that will aim to rival the fastest versions of the Model 3 and the Polestar 2. There will be a GT version of both the hatchback and the Saloon, but we should probably point out that in the UK, it's going to be the hatchback which is expected to be significantly more popular than the Saloon. And that's a reflection of the buying trends in our market. And Kia, in fact, is building the hatchback in its European plant in Slovakia, but the Saloon will be built in South Korea. Trim levels haven't been confirmed, but it's highly likely that the EV4 will follow Kia's other electric models in offering an entry-level Air version, then mid-spec GT line with a range-topping GT line S. And we've seen in the EV3 that it's actually the entry-level Air that we think is the pick of the lineup, because even though it's the cheapest model, it is still very well equipped. And we hope that will be the same case for the EV4. Now, what about the price? Well, nothing's been confirmed yet, but of course we know that EV3 starts at around £33,000 and the EV6 starts at around £45,500. So you can imagine this EV4 will slot somewhere in the middle there, with a starting price around £36,000 to be expected. And when it comes to the Saloon, that could potentially cost around £1,000 more than the hatchback, but none of this has been confirmed yet, so we'll have to wait and see. But if the starting price does begin around there, then this will be competitively priced against things like the Born and the Model 3. And of course, as with any Kia, if you buy an EV4, you'll get the manufacturer's fantastic 7-year warranty as standard, which is a big bonus. So the EV4 seems practical, nice inside, it's got a good range, and it's probably going to be very good value compared to its rivals, all of which sounds pretty familiar. Kia clearly has a formula that it's sticking to with its electric cars, and based on everything that we've driven and seen so far, that's no bad thing at all. And we're looking forward to driving the EV4 later this year. Thanks very much for watching this first look of the new EV4. If you want to see another video, then click there and subscribe to our channel while you're at it. And if you want to read more about this car and every other car around, click on that link to go to whatcar.com.